Welcome to Smarter Circuits, the podcast. I want to tell you my head is filled with things to say. Today, I'm going to be talking about ownership and the right to review, repair, or modify. Big topic, have a lot of very strong feelings about it, as I'm sure many of my viewers and listeners do as well. But before I get into that, old business. The only thing that I really have is the studio reorganization. It has begun, and soon I will be cataloging the retro collection so members can expect some extra content very, very soon on those things. I will probably also do some sort of overview, summary video of some kind for my regular viewers and listeners as well. But that's coming, sort of down the road. I am going to be shooting while I'm reorganizing as well, so that, because if I waited until I was done, I have no idea when I'm going to be done. Partly because I have to catalog that everything that's in there, also partly because I expect I'm going to be disassembling that pool table so that I can reclaim some of the room in my room. And the other thing that I'll be doing when that happens is setting up the light rigging. So I get all of the light stands off of the floor because there's a ton of light stands. Like the back half of the studio is almost, you can't walk through it without tripping over a cord or bumping a light. And the other thing that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be putting up my screen stand. I'm not going to be using a backdrop screen or anything like that. I can't stand faux backgrounds. They are super tacky at best. I think that the videos that have them, they look like they're shot at the Walmart Family Photo Center. But I might shoot with a black background just to see how that goes, and it may be actually kind of useful in some cases. And I'm definitely going to be shooting with my green screen. I don't know what or why I would use it, but it's neat, and I want to experiment a little bit. So, yeah, I'll be doing that. Now, new business. And really, the only thing that I have here is I'm rebuilding my network, sort of. Basically, I'm just putting in a new IP schema, changing over my Wi-Fi. So I used to have a rolling password for my Wi-Fi, and I did not do that manually. I had a Raspberry Pi that was actually responsible for doing that. That Raspberry Pi would send messages out to my Shelly devices to tell them about the new information and the new setup, and it would also put a message on a message queue that other Raspberry Pis that I have would pick up, and then they would do it. The only things that I had to change manually were like my phone. And I was okay with doing that. But when I got my Ubiquiti security gateway and my U6 Pros, I didn't look into how to do that. And I'm sure that it's possible. So I'll be doing that again. When I get to that, the whole point of this is when I get to that stuff, I will probably do videos on those things as well. I would like to start doing a few more IT related videos. I have avoided it up to this point for the most part because there are other channels dedicated to it that I feel give a lot more information. But it is something that I do know. I do have a fairly large network that I can sort of play around with and show different sort of infrastructure principles and stuff like that. So, yeah, probably going to do more of that during this whole thing. The other thing, the only other new thing is I now have a sort of cameraman. When I say sort of, it's because he's not always going to be available. Um, I'm, and I'm not exactly sure when or why I will need him until for sure spring, because when I do the outdoor stuff, it would be really nice to have a cameraman to follow what I'm doing rather than having to move static shots or anything like that. And I think that it'll look better for the viewers. So that will be useful. It's my son. He's looking into doing videos himself, so he wanted a little bit of practice. And I know a few things that I can show him. At least to get him started. But yeah, so some things are going to happen differently soon, I hope. Not sure what exactly. And that brings me to the main event. If you are not familiar with Louis Rossman, you should be familiar with Louis Rossman. I will link to his channel in the description. Louis Rossman is a huge advocate for right to repair. And by that, I don't just mean like he talks about it on his channel or, you know, he has actually fought for legislation to be passed to ensure consumers have their right to repair. I know that he did this specifically in New York. I think he did it in another state as well, but I don't know what state that is. As far as I know, the only 4 states that I'm aware of that have right to repair laws are California, Colorado, Minnesota, and New York. I don't think, and there's like 7 or 8 other ones that are trying to do it but haven't quite done it yet. Or theirs is like really broad or vague. But anyway, Louis Rossman is a great guy to go to if you believe in owning what you buy, which I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. But first, the reason that I brought up Louis Rossman is there are 2 examples that I want to talk about that have happened in recent months to talk about this, to talk about the right to review. That you've probably talked about or heard about right to repair, but I believe there's another thing that's under attack, and that's the right to review. And the reason that I say that is because there is currently a lawsuit involving Stefan Fischer. Stefan? I think it's Stefan. Anyway, Mr. Fischer, who has a 4x4 adventure channel, which I think is actually called 4x4 Adventures. I'm not sure, but I'll put it in the description. Anyway, this gentleman who lives in Australia, he and many of his friends get together and they go out and they do some pretty serious 4x4ing in some pretty rough terrain, places you don't want to be stuck. And so he does some product reviews on the equipment that he uses. One of those things was the battery in his Land Rover. Now, when you do the kind of off-roading that Mr. Fischer and his friends are doing, you need some pretty serious kit. This battery, the battery that this whole thing is about a company called DCS. They sued Stefan Fischer because he did an honest review of their battery. He called them out for claiming something that the battery was not capable of physically. And that's a really big deal in his circles because you don't want your battery giving out in the middle of nowhere. And so this hardened, big capacity battery, which by the way runs I think $1,800 or $1,900. Okay, so we're not just talking your AutoZone diehard. These things are supposed to be super reliable. The company claimed that it had a certain capacity and it didn't. It ran low a lot quicker than it was supposed to. And the tests that Stefan Fischer did were all absolutely legitimate, above board. This wasn't, he hated the company and so he went after them or whatever. This was an honest test and review of this battery, and DCS filed a defamation lawsuit against him, and which I believe is probably still being fought at the moment. I don't know. I haven't looked at updates in a couple weeks, but that is a huge threat to the consumer. The reason that I say that is because product reviews are necessary in order for the consumer to make an informed decision. Sometimes, like in the case of DCS, you can't trust the company to disclose everything or even be honest in some cases. So it's important to have people who buy these things, run them through their paces, and then report on what they find. Product reviews are a very important thing, and especially now when you know full well that a great number of them are fake. They're either bot generated on Amazon or something like that, or they're paid, to say nice things. And that's kind of crap. I believe, it is my opinion, that a lot of video reviewers are still, they still have some integrity because they have other ways of making revenue. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are some that are bought, but for the most part, I think that content creators that do product reviews are more concerned with the content creation than the reviews, if that makes any sense. Anyway, the point is, if companies are allowed to file lawsuits against people because they don't like what they said, or they said something negative about the product, that's bad. I can understand if Mr. Fischer was lying or twisting something to look like it's not. But it's actually quite the opposite. The people who are twisting the truth in this case are the manufacturers. So, this is something we should all be very aware of. We should all throw our support behind folks like Stephen Fischer so that we can continue to have integrity in product reviews, so that consumers can know whether or not they're spending their money wisely. Because if you just left it up to the companies to tell you, they're not going to tell you their flaws. There might be a couple that would be somewhat honest, but I would wager that none of them would ever be completely honest, unless they're forced to, right? Which is a whole other thing I'll talk about here in a little bit. The other example that I wanted to give, this one is absolutely right to repair, is, excuse me, Tom Evans Audio going after Mend It Mark. Mend It Mark is another channel. The guy is an absolute genius. He does things way beyond my capabilities or understanding. And he's really, really cool about the whole thing. He was given a preamp to repair. Preamp built by Tom Evans Audio, which, as I understand it, costs like £25,000. Not sure exactly what that is in US, but it's a lot. I want to say it's around 30. It's an expensive piece of kit. It's a very special piece of kit. And this is where it gets even worse. The customer, the person who bought that preamp, sent it back to the manufacturer because there was a defect, and the manufacturer wanted to charge them thousands of dollars to fix it. So the customer was like, no, I don't think I don't think it needs that, and had them send it to Mend It Mark. And Mend It Mark took a look at it. Now there were actually two things that happened on that were unfortunate. One was that it was damaged in transit to Mend It Mark, which he fixed that as well. And he didn't have to, but he did because, it was a good thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And then the other thing was that they filed a copyright against him because he repaired something that was wrong on the board. As it turns out, this thousands of dollar repair boiled down to one cap. And that's, so right there kind of tells you how much integrity the company has. I don't know if there's any legal action that has been taken either way, but I do know that they got a hold of YouTube and had YouTube pull the video for copyright, which is absolute crap. Okay, so here's another thing. And this is, let me get into this, and I'll talk about why this is one of the worst things I've ever heard. First, I fully believe, and I'm sure that most people do, that if I buy something, I own it. It is mine. I can do whatever I want with it so long as it doesn't hurt another human being or put the public in danger. And the reason that I specify those things is because later I'm going to be talking about the right to modify. And there are some areas in there that might be a bit sensitive to, um, you know, people futzing with them. But I'll talk about that in a moment. The only time that I think it's okay for somebody to dictate to you what you can and cannot do with a product or a piece of equipment is if you are leasing or renting that piece of equipment. That makes sense because you're borrowing it. Now, if I lend my neighbor my lawnmower and the spark plug is carbon fouled and he changes the spark plug, I'm not going to get angry at him. But if he was unqualified and made it worse, I can understand having a fear about that. In order to avoid that, I can understand saying, "Hey, if something goes wrong, call me and I will come and fix it." That's a completely different situation than if he bought a lawnmower and he wanted to snap the spark plug off in the cylinder. It's not my lawnmower. I don't care. You do whatever you want. As long as you don't set my house on fire, go for it. So, the core of all of this is the concept of ownership. Whether or not you have the freedom to do as you choose with the thing you spend your money on. And I believe you do. Again, within reason, which I'll get to. There are some things that we are all used to not being sort of accessible, right? If you're of a certain age, you'll remember cable boxes. Now, you may also remember that there were guys that took those apart and figured out how to game the system. And I can understand why the cable companies were mad about that, because they did bypass some pay features. But they didn't even make as big of a fuss then as companies like Apple are making now about letting people repair their own stuff. And modding is a whole different thing, right? The video game console market has had this war going on for a very long time as to whether or not you are allowed to modify your own equipment. And here's the thing. There was a big stink about whether or not bypassing digital rights management or copyright management software was okay. In my opinion, if I'm able to do it, well, sorry about your luck. Maybe do it better. I don't know. But it's my product. I will do with it what I want. Now, there are some sort of gray areas when it comes to media, because when you buy a movie, I don't know if people realize this, you are not actually buying that movie. You're not buying a copy of that movie. The physical media that you buy, if you buy like a Blu-ray or something, is irrelevant. What you're actually paying for is the right to view it, at least in the eyes of the law. You are licensing, basically, that media. So that's kind of a different situation. But when it comes to hardware, if I took apart your device, reverse engineered it, and then started manufacturing my own and selling it cheaper, that is absolutely a problem. That's a real terrible thing to do. But if I'm just showing it on my YouTube channel, sorry about your luck. That is not copyright infringement. I have in no way, shape, or form used your product to make money other than to show it on my channel. And I can show anything I own on my channel. I mean, again, within reason. There are some things that will definitely get you demonetized. But this whole thing is insane. And it starts with companies like Sony, and this is one that I want to talk about very specifically for a moment, John Deere. If you are in the agricultural community, you probably already know what I'm about to talk about. You might anyway, if you've been paying attention. But for those who don't, John Deere used to be, well, and still sort of is, really terrible to farmers when it comes to repairing their own things. So far as to have also filed lawsuits of their own, which right now there are at least a dozen lawsuits against John Deere, antitrust lawsuits from farmers who use their equipment and can't fix it because John Deere has put some sort of restriction there. Now, this has been worsened recently because the result of some of those early lawsuits was that the American Farm Bureau Federation, okay, hold on a second. Yes, American Farm Bureau Federation signed an MOU, which is something that I didn't. What is it? Doggone it! I didn't see. I didn't put in here what the MOU is. 1 second. Memorandum of Understanding. Okay, so they signed a memorandum of understanding between John Deere and the AFBF, saying we are going to give farmers the tools and resources they need to repair their own equipment because they should be able to. Now, they're not the only one that signed one of these. There are a bunch of manufacturers that did. Kubota was one of them. And then a few other like big, equipment manufacturing concerns. They basically made an agreement that said, yeah, we're going to let you, because you spend so much money, we're going to let you go ahead and fix this, and we're going to make these parts available. Because here's the thing, they're still making money on the parts, right? But John Deere has opted to retaliate in some pretty shitty ways. Not that retaliation is really great anyway, but they're doing things like they're delaying repair schedules. They're making parts exorbitantly expensive or difficult to find. They're actually controlling the availability of things. All of those things are pretty questionable. They're also a little bit difficult to prove, which is why I think a lot of these lawsuits are still pending. But there's some interesting things going on here. On their website, they claim, and I quote, "For over 180 years, John Deere has empowered customers to maintain and repair their own machines. We fully support a customer safely maintaining, diagnosing, and repairing their own equipment. That's why we provide tools, parts, training videos, manuals, and remote access for customers to work on their machines." This is all complete and utter bull. Complete and utter bull. They have not empowered customers to maintain and repair their own equipment for 180 years. They did in the beginning because nobody thought not to at the time. But the moment they thought not to, John Deere was on board and started restricting things. Now, you could buy belts, pulleys. I'm sure you could probably even buy exhaust system, suspension system, brake system components. But you couldn't do things like get into the ECU, which is the electronic component that controls the machine. You couldn't repair your own control devices, things of that nature. The things that they restrict are also very expensive things, which is one of the reasons why they do it. They want you to go back to their dealership. They want you to pay them to do the work. And of course, the labor is going to be quite a bit more than the parts. So this is all like really, really shady and sketchy. And it has been a fight between the farmers and the manufacturers of this equipment for quite a long time. And one of the reasons why I want to focus, or why I am focusing on this specific example, is because, like, of all of the people in the world to say, hey, you can't, work on your own stuff, it's the food growers? What is wrong with you? we should be supporting them as much as we possibly can and enabling them to, um, progress and grow, because they are going to become more efficient and they are going to become um, more economically sound by maintaining their own farm. That's what they've done for like ever. It's crazy to me because I have a very close friend that I grew up with who lived on a farm, and they did not have a lot of money by any stretch of the imagination. They were barely break even, and they were one of the farms that was doing the best at the time. And so any sort of repair or extra cost was extremely, extremely detrimental to their success. As a matter of fact, there came a point where they just couldn't manage, and they had to sell parts of the farm in order to maintain the other parts. And that's why there's a kind of a trope, selling the farm hill by hill. Excuse me, man. That's a thing. That's a thing that happens. That's a thing that farmers are forced to do in order to stay alive. And it's so weird to me that it's such a struggle. And it's not just here in the United States. I know that this is also a struggle in the UK as well for farmers there. That you just, number one, the prices that they pay for the things is horrible, because they want to, and they being the grocery stores, etc., they want to mark things up insanely, but still be competitive with one another. And the way that they do that is by screwing over the farmer, the very supplier of the thing. This is not something that Panasonic would put up with, so I don't know why it's okay for the farmers. Why we should not be lowballing our food, because here's the other thing. Historically, lowballing prices is also what forces companies to start cutting corners. And the moment you start cutting corners, quality degrades. And you don't want farm quality to degrade, because what you end up with when they can't do what they're supposed to do properly is disease. You end up with E. coli and things of that nature, big outbreaks. We've been recently having quite a few of those. And chances are it's because they're either not paying attention because they have too many other things that they have to worry about, or they simply can't afford what they need in order to keep that from happening. Now, I don't know a lot about the specifics when it comes to, these recent outbreaks, but I do know that there are a lot of companies fighting against people being able to work on their own stuff. And so one of the excuses, let me see if I can find this here. One of the excuses that they do is, that they make is, they say that right to repair laws will hinder innovation and regulatory compliance. And that's just absolute bullshit. 100% bullshit. Because doing a brake job on my car doesn't affect the emissions control system. And if I do break the emissions control system, that doesn't make the manufacturer non-compliant. That's ridiculous. It's asinine. Also, you can make restrictions on dangerous material. I could understand that. There was somebody who got some pretty nasty radiation poisoning and died, and the people around them, because they found a piece of medical equipment at a scrapyard and decided to disassemble it, and it had radioactive material in it. So that's a bad situation. There's all kinds of things that went wrong before that, though, that should never have been able to happen. But so I can understand saying, hey, don't crack this thing open because, there's death inside. But that's a completely different thing than, replacing your own radiator. That's pretty innocuous, frankly. And again, one of the most dangerous, or I should say, one of the systems that prevents a vehicle from being dangerous in the first place is the brake system. And you're absolutely able to do that. Now, and here's the other thing. So, going back to that example, doing my own brakes, having the ability to do my own brakes, did not prevent Ford from putting touchscreens in their cars. So, how is right to repair hindering innovation? It's not. And if it is, you suck at innovating, you should be replaced. Okay? Because what most of these things boil down to is these companies trying to do the least possible to make the most money. And what I say to that is, you are the problem. You are lazy. Be better at business. Okay? If you have a problem with a regulation, if you have a problem with a tax, look, move and flow and do the thing, right? You should be able to adapt to any situation. That's the way it's supposed to be. And if you don't adapt, you die. And I actually want to talk about that very specifically for a moment, because there are a lot of companies right now that feel bulletproof. And there's a lot of people that think they're bulletproof. And they're not. Let's talk about Google and Apple and Amazon for just a moment. Those companies seem impossibly large, like they'll never die. But none of those companies owned all of the airwaves. But there was a company that did at one time. The Radio Corporation of America, or RCA, at one point in its history, owned radio waves. If you wanted to broadcast or receive, or broadcast or build a product to receive radio signals, you had to pay the Radio Corporation of America license fees. Now, that got broken up for a multitude of reasons, but that company maintained being one of the largest and most prolific companies in history. And they were way bigger than Apple and Google. The numbers may not seem like it because, inflation and stuff. But if you look at the situation, if you look at the time, those companies were way bigger than the companies of today. Another example, Sears. Sears was way bigger than Amazon and way more capable than Amazon. There was a time when you could open up a Sears catalog, call them up, and order an entire house, and they would ship it to you. Not assembled. They would ship you materials and instructions. And then you would have to assemble it. And we're not talking like, prefab kind of houses. These were, you had to cut wood and that sort of thing. They were just like any other house. There are quite a few Sears homes still standing that came from that era. So, and they fell. They fell hard. RCA fell hard. GE, Kenmore, Whirlpool, Craftsman, which a lot of those are related to Sears, but they all fell hard. Compaq. Let's talk about Compaq for a second. Compaq, C-O-M-P-A-Q, if you don't know, was the world's largest PC manufacturer at one time. They were bigger than Apple. As a matter of fact, in 1999, they were a lot bigger than Apple. They had a revenue of $31 billion to Apple's 6. They employed 69,000 employees to Apple's 7,000. They were absolutely enormous. And it only really took 2 or 3 years for them to die. They acquired a company called DEC and the search engine Alta Vista, if you remember that. And if you do, it might be time to schedule your colonoscopy. And after they did that, that was one of the death knells for them. The other, and the reason that I'm talking about all of these companies made the same fundamental mistake. They didn't listen to their customers. they didn't continue to serve their needs in a way that created a healthy relationship, basically, with their customers. RCA got basically obsessed with an idea that nobody needed or wanted, and then eventually was replaced by something better. And they still fought to do these things their way, and it destroyed their company. Sears, same thing. Sears is a really interesting one because let's take Craftsman out for a second. Craftsman used to be one of the top quality brands in tools. You also used to be able to take your Craftsman tools in and have them replaced or repaired, no questions asked. The moment they stopped doing that is actually when they started running into trouble. Now, there were other reasons. There's other bad business decisions that were made, and there were, again, just like Compaq. And ultimately they were purchased by somebody else who ran them straight into the ground, which also happened to Compaq. HP bought Compaq in 2002 for $25 billion and immediately ran them into the ground, completely cutting the brand off in 2013. So basically they milked it and sold the cow, which is pretty common. But again, the things that they lacked were the things that customers wanted. In the case of Compaq, a lot of that was the direct-to-consumer market. Dell made it easy for you to purchase a PC from them. Compaq, it wasn't hard, but it wasn't as simple as it was for Dell. You had to go to a place. You had to go to a store to pick up a Compaq. And a lot of times, they just weren't very good towards the end there. The Presario line went to complete crap. And that was one of their bigger models, particularly in the retail space, which was something that they absolutely dominated for the longest time. But anyway, so, and there are other examples. General Electric is another example. If you would have asked somebody in 1960 if General Electric would ever die, they would have told you absolutely not. General Electric will be around forever. They're huge. Zenith, the television manufacturer, same thing. They refused to move forward. They refused to allow their customers to change the way they did business. And so they died. Yeah. And all of this is failure to listen. It's not. So there's two things here. There's failure to innovate, and there's listening to the customer. A lot of times, I think that people attribute these failures to the former, and that's somewhat true, but it was all caused by the latter. Because they didn't listen to the customer, they didn't innovate. And I actually have an example of a company that did this absolutely right and is still doing it absolutely right. And that company is Radio Flyer. Radio Flyer started making wagons 107 years ago. And they still make the wagons that they made 80 to 90 years ago. The reason I say that is because Radio Flyer was started by a guy who was a carpenter who made wooden wagons, and then eventually, in order to evolve and serve his customers' needs, he started to employ, because the demand for his wagons was way bigger than what he could manage. So he found a way, right? Unlike Apple, who had to borrow money, he found a way to use automotive manufacturing techniques to build and assemble these wagons. That's when they started using the stamped steel wagons that most of us, if you've heard of Radio Flyer, imagine those little red wagons. So they still sell that little red wagon. They sell a bunch of other stuff too. They even sell e-bikes. And that expansion into those markets was not rapid. It wasn't a sudden passion play. It wasn't somebody read an article and decided to take the company in a different direction. It wasn't, hey, everything seems to be going great, so let's change something because, coasting is bad. And it really isn't. So what Radio Flyer ultimately did was they listened to their customers. They realized what their customers wanted. They realized what was most appropriate for them to supply, and they knew what they could and could not market. And their company is still going strong 107 years later. So you can't tell me that it can't be done. Now, do I think that all companies eventually fail? Yes, absolutely. Because eventually the vision changes so much from the original idea that it's just not feasible. I think Apple is headed for that, in all honesty, because they keep wanting more and knowing less. And that is eventually going to be their downfall. Google, I think, might take a little bit of time, but I think that they're actually going to fall to the same sort of situation that RCA did. They already started to. So, Google having this habit of having temporary toys that they get tired of and then shelve, like Wave, for instance. That's almost exactly the same as RCA Labs. It's not as big scale because RCA Labs, man, they made a lot of really cool stuff, and a lot of it we never got to see because nobody could figure out how to employ it. But which is another one of their problems. But rather than listening to the customer, they thought that they would dictate to the customer what they needed. And there's only one company really that kind of did that and got away with it, and that is Apple, to be fair. But only for so long before the general public happened to them. So yeah, these companies, I've gone like way off. I think I've gone way off topic here, but the whole right to repair thing, the fact that these companies are fighting it tells me that they are afraid of changes. They're afraid of needing to do better. They're afraid of, maybe taking a risk and a product not working. Now, and there's another company I want to bring up in that. I didn't even write this down. I'm completely winging it at this point. Sony. Sony is a perfect example of a company that absolutely gets away with trying some off-the-wall shit and completely getting away with it and still surviving as a company. They are one of those companies that loves, like, a toaster's really great, but what if we added a fish scaler? Right? That's their mentality. They have made some weird products that have failed miserably. But they knew that they were risks. They approached them as experimental in the first place. And they didn't hedge their bets on those things. They had other things that they knew were concrete that could provide them the revenue to be able to experiment in those other ways, take some risks, and come up with new ideas that would put them ahead of everybody else. PlayStation, for example. I mean, Sony absolutely dominated immediately, right out of the gate, with the PlayStation. And that was a risk. But it was a risk that they had already figured out little pieces of here and there through their other experimentation. And Sony is... I don't like Sony. I don't like Sony because they are very much against right to repair. I think some of their DRM tactics over the years have been just ridiculous. Digital rights management, if you don't know what DRM is. And there's probably going to be a lot of people that are like, well, Sony's great. Memory stick. Vio. No, they're not. They are just like any other company. Other than their ability to innovate. And I will give them the credit for the innovation because they're willing to take those risks. Companies should focus on building quality products and developing trust above all else. Don't trap me in your ecosystem. Make me want to be there. So there's another strength Apple had. Apple initially, the reason that they got the massive following that they did and the people that believe in them so much is because they created a thing. They created a way of doing things. Everything in their ecosystem is very cohesive and fluid. And so, people were very comfortable. They came in on their own. Apple said, these are the things you can do if you use our products, rather than saying once you're in for good, although they do say that now. But they at least gave you a reason to want to go to them. They had things that other manufacturers didn't have. They offered new and innovative products. Now, I think that they stopped innovating quite some years ago and have just been sort of regurgitating the same ideas for quite some time, and banking on that will eventually kill your company. You have to have some other thing, right? Again, going back to Radio Flyer, you can keep a certain base level, but you really need to be able to diversify in other areas too. And I'm no businessman, nor would I want to be one. But I really do think that there was a time when we believed in building long-lasting things. And I think that the biggest example of that, honestly, was the early automotive industry, which recognized that they could sell you repair parts, or they could sell you the next model with a few extra features. Like, they were constantly in motion. But not necessarily afraid that you were going to work on their cars. We need to have a little bit more of that. Now, the automotive industry is just as guilty as the consumer electronics industry at this point when it comes to disposable components because, well, cars are practically consumer electronics now. But, I think we can go back. I think if we really put our mind to it, we could find a way to make components a little bit more fundamentally field replaceable, rather than having to throw out 1,000 components because 2 of them went bad. That's really just, I don't know. No matter what you believe or how you think about those things, it's just not a good idea. It's super wasteful, and there's no reason to do it, other than just being an asshole. Okay, so I've babbled about that for a while. That's more or less all I have. I want the listener to take away from that no company is invincible, number one. And number two, we should never, no matter how big they get, we should never let them dictate to us what we are allowed to do with our possessions. Again, so long as I am not hurting somebody else, right? So talk about modding for just a moment. I don't have a problem with modding. Modding is something that we have done for a very long time. It's a staple in American culture, when it comes to things like racing, for instance, which, by the way, souping up cars was actually a criminal activity to begin with, and yet it wasn't frowned upon by the manufacturers. And what I mean by that is a lot of that started with prohibition. There were bootleggers that wanted to be able to outrun the police, so they made their cars faster. And then, while they were sitting around bored, they were like, hey, let's pit our cars against each other and see how they do. And thus, basically, pro street racing kind of started. And there were other things, that started like Formula and stuff like that. But so I'm not saying that invented racing, but it was the dawn of modifying your vehicles. And that's been possible ever since. I do feel like there might be some sort of push to try to prevent that now, just because these cars are just so disposable. But I think that we should, as consumers, and if you don't know how to force a company to do a thing, it's real stupid easy. Don't give them your money. If they're not doing the thing you want, Don't give them your money. Don't give them your money, not only because it's their resource, but it's also a vote of confidence. You are basically saying, I trust you. Give me your product, and here's my time, right? The little slips of paper that represent my time. Don't spend money with companies that won't let you own what you buy, because it's complete and utter bullshit. I will probably talk about this topic again. I was kind of being a little bit loose with this episode because, it's in between Christmas and New Year's. I didn't even know if I was going to do it in the first place. So hopefully, if you're still with me, I haven't bored you to death or upset you too much. But this is something that I want to continuously put in people's minds, that if we are not cognizant of it, these sneaky bastards will take away our right to own our things. And that's unacceptable. Absolutely 100% unacceptable. What I do in my home, with my home, is none of your damn business so long as I don't set you on fire, right? Freedom, in my opinion, the definition of freedom is being able to do whatever the hell I want so long as it does not endanger somebody else or prevent them from exercising their freedoms. If they make me uncomfortable, well, get over it, because that's not a good enough reason to stop somebody. If you're afraid that it's going to prevent you from making the next year's model, get over it. That's not our problem. That's your problem. Innovate. Come up with something different. Be better at doing the thing. Don't make excuses. Don't point the finger at everybody else and say, my business is failing because they, wanted to mod their Xbox. That's not a thing. It's just not a thing. It's not going to prevent you from doing anything. As a matter of fact, I honestly do believe that companies who encourage or at least honestly support repair and modification, repair and or modification, those companies are going to be around much longer. Those companies are going to be the desirable ones. And as long as they're building a quality product, they're going to have repeat business. Again, you can also sell the things that are needed to repair the thing. So you can still build in a profit into just the repair side of that product. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have on that subject. I mean, I don't know, not really. I could probably talk about right to repair for days and I could give hundreds of examples of companies that have failed because they don't listen to their customers, because they don't move forward, because they don't, because they try to trap their customers rather than serve their customers. Ultimately, these companies will fail. Even the ones that seem like they're succeeding, that are trapping their customers. People are going to get tired of the shit, and it's going to stop. People are going to stop spending the money on those companies. Investors are going to stop believing in those companies and putting their money in their pockets. So yeah, this is it's a big deal. It's a very, very big deal. It's one of our most fundamental freedoms, and we should never let it be taken away. And we should protect our creators, our innovators. We should be protecting people like Mendit Mark, who are just trying to do the right thing by the end user. We should, stand up with people like Stefan Fischer, when companies say, you can't tell the truth about my product. Those are problems, and we should all be aware of them. Now, not any one of us probably can't do much about those things unless you're Louis Rossman, but all of us, we can. So just remember that. Keep that in mind. I have been babbling for quite some time now. If you are still with me, thank you. It's time for my final thoughts. So, I have to give a short channel update. I'm sorry. And it's going to be a very short channel update because I'm still writing scripts. I expect to shoot second week of January, maybe. Right now, we're looking at 11,000 views for the month. I got 98 subs this month. Thank you to all of you for subscribing, for tagging along. My goals for next year, I would like to hit 10,000 subs. I'd like to smooth out some of my production issues. And I'd like to get to 200 members. Those are my goals for next year. So, and thank you to everybody who's allowed me to get as far as I have this year. I have 2,800 plus subscribers, and even that is mind-bending to me, that there would be even half that many people interested in listening to me say stuff and babble. But so I appreciate every last one of you. So final thoughts. You can contact me if you want to give me feedback, which is super, super important. I'm going to try to do this every podcast episode just so that it's out there. You can email me at smartercircuits@gmail.com. You can jump on our Discord and message me. I don't mind, as long as you don't get weird on me. And of course, you can comment on the videos. So I would like to thank all of my members, subscribers, viewers, listeners, attentive telepaths for giving me your minutes. We all have a limited number of minutes, and you've decided to spend some of yours with me. That's really, really awesome. I genuinely mean that. So that's it for me. I do hope you will join me next time as I continue to babble about smarter circuits. And Happy New Year.